This evening, we're going to talk a little bit about the Antichrist and the man of sin, depending on if we get the first part of this lesson completed. And the more I've been studying on some of this, the more I'm going to probably divide this lesson into the Antichrist and the man of sin. But it is a common element of end-time speculation that in the future there will be the rise of a world ruler, an individual who first comes on the political scene as a hero, but proves to be a villain. Is thought to be the Antichrist, the man of sin, described in the Bible. The anticipation of such people is not limited just to the premillennial ideology, but even the amillennialists, or some, believe this. And as I have been studying this to present these lessons, it's a sad commentary, but a reality, that there are many who either have not studied this out or whatever situation may be, but believe that there is going to be in the future this individual rise up to bring chaos into the world. As we have noted in all of these lessons, to me it does not matter what people think, what people say. It doesn't matter to me what they write, what they put out on the World Wide Web, or whatever it may be. We have to stick with what God says. And tonight, I want us to consider who is the Antichrist. When we think about the Antichrist as revealed in the Bible, we only find this expression or this wording utilized 5 times, and only in the writings of John, and only in 1 John and 2 John. John applies the term Antichrist to more than one individual in this context, not just a group of individuals. He utilizes this phrase, like I noted, 5 times. If we look at 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18, it says, "Children, it is the last hour. And just as you have heard, the Antichrist is coming. Even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour." Now I would encourage everyone to go back to our study on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, because we dealt with this topic multiple times. And you can go back and get some more teaching or more learning concerning the Antichrist in those lessons. But tonight I want us to think about what John is writing here. He notes that it is the last hour, just as you heard, the Antichrist is coming. And he also notes, even now many Antichrists have appeared. So it's kind of a unique thing in my mind, and I've been trying to get it worked out on not only the English language but the original text, to how we are using this Antichrist, and then we use a plural, and I'll note just a touch more about that as we go along. But this is one of the places that this is utilized. Antichrist is coming. There's already a lot of them here. In 1 John chapter 2 and verse 22, it says, "Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son." Again, we find this same idea, yet a definition of who the Antichrist is. One who denies that Jesus is the Christ. And then we go on down to 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4, beginning there in verse 2. It says, "By this we know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now is already in the world." This takes us back up into chapter 2, where he notes that this is the spirit of the Antichrist, and they are already in the world. Now remember, there are those who want to promote the ideology that the Antichrist is coming sometime in the future. John is the only one that utilizes this phrase in his writings. And twice we've already seen that they are multiples and that they are already in the world. In this passage, we also get a definition of what is the spirit of the Antichrist. In essence, it denotes that every spirit that confesses that Jesus has come in the flesh is from God. Now look at the next one. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist. So there's your definition in verse 3. And then we go down to 2 John chapter 1. I always told that to Harry. I was always telling him chapter 1 in 2 John. He would argue with me about it. There's only one chapter in 2 John. But we're going to go down to verse 7. Verse 7. John writes, now I want you to listen. "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver, the Antichrist. Watch yourselves that you do not lose what we have accomplished, but you may receive a full reward. Anyone who goes too far and does not abide in the teachings of Christ does not have God. The one who abides in the teaching, he has both the Father and the Son." Now, again, in this, we have a definition of who the Antichrist is. And it notes here that many deceivers, wrong button. Here we go. Right button. "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Now, that's a key factor, because John is writing concerning Gnosticism. Gnosticism was the teaching that Jesus came in the Spirit, but not in the flesh. So we have a definition of who John is calling the Antichrist. Now, the wording there is Antichristos. That's the original language. And that denotes the idea of someone who has moved away from Christ. They weren't listening to what God had to say, but they were making up their own ideas, their own ideology. And here in 2 John, if you look down there at verse 9, it says, anyone who goes too far and does not abide in the teachings of Christ does not have God. The one who abides in the teaching, he is both the Father and the Son. Now that was the situation with Gnosticism. The Gnostics was saying, well, Jesus could not have come in the flesh because all flesh is evil. And that was what they believed. The Spirit was good. So Jesus could not have come in the flesh, was their teaching. Well, the thing about it was that they had got to the point that they didn't believe that we could do anything good in the body, so why worry about it? In other words, if there was a sin out there and we sinned, then it's okay. They also became ascetics. In other words, they would do things to their body to hurt themselves because they believed themselves to be evil. They did not believe that there was any way that we could be good. And that just pretty much destroys what Jesus came to do and did on the cross. And that was die for the forgiveness of our sins. Now, Gnosticism has the idea that as long as my spirit's okay, then I'm good to go. I mean, I'm good with God. But on the other hand, I can't do anything about my worldly, immoral lifestyle. Period. So you can be just as immoral as you want to be. You can be just as ungodly, disobedient to God as you want to be. But that's in the flesh. So it hasn't got anything to do with the Spirit. Now, some writers have made the statement that I've looked at of recent, that Gnosticism faded out over the time. Gnosticism did not fade out. You think about so many religious ideologies in our world today, and they are as Gnostic as the day is long. As long as they believe the spiritual's good, they live worldly lives. And a doctrine that denotes that is the idea that it doesn't matter how you live in this world, God's going to let everybody into heaven anyway. Now that's the idea of Gnosticism. Worldliness. If you look at what Gnosticism is, and you look at people that are non-religious, they don't acknowledge Jesus is coming. They don't believe in Jesus. but they live in the world. But deep down, many of those, if you really press them, have this belief that, well, I don't believe in Jesus, but God's going to take care of me in the end anyway. That's Gnosticism. So John is talking about Gnosticism in this writing. The Antichrist are Gnostics. Now, one of the things that you need to think about, who's John writing to? Is he writing to Christians or non-Christians? John's writing to Christians. These people had moved away from Christ. They were those that were going too far and not abiding in the teachings of Christ. That is the Antichrist. People today who falter away from, goes too far and does not abide in the teachings of Christ, that are Christians, fall into this same category. Let's look at a few observations, if we may. We have the definite article here, the word "the." In chapter 1, chapter 2, verse 22, it says, "This is the Antichrist." And some note the idea that this is a singular individual. In 1 John 4, it talks about, down in verse 3, it talks about this is the spirit of the Antichrist. And then over in 2 John 7 through 9, in verse 7, it says this is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Now, I'm not an English scholar, nor am I a Greek scholar, but I went back and I looked at this, and the definite article is there in these places. That's in the Greek context. It denotes the idea that this is the Antichrist. This is that spirit of the Antichrist. These are the Antichrist. And it doesn't really bring to light a singularity. It denotes the idea of a indefinite and a plural use of the term. And it's really, like I say, it's hard for me to explain it because I don't quite grasp it completely in my own mind. But it's like over here in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18. He says, just as you heard that Antichrist is coming. And then he turns right around in the same breath, if you will. Or maybe he took a breath. There's a comma there. It says, even now many antichrists have appeared. The plurality. So the idea that is promoted of a singularity of the Antichrist doesn't fit Scripture. Now, in this, I have the New American Standard Version here. Most of the versions that I looked at, and I looked at several as I was restudying all of this, it notes here, just as you heard that Antichrist is coming. Now in the New King James Version, not the Old King James, but the New King James Version, it's like this, that the capital A Antichrist is coming, that would denote an individual. But the Textus Receptus that the King James Version was taken from, it's not this way. Only in this version do we find this, so we got to be careful about those types of things, because such things as this right here could lead people astray by thinking it was a singularity rather than a plural. So not only do they capitalize the A, which denotes an individual, but they have added the article before the word. It's been added in. And again, I took the time whenever I was studying this, and I went back to look at the Textus Receptus, which is the Greek text that's used in the translation of King James. It's not there. It's not there. So, just a note on that. We need to note that in the sense the Antichrist is already present in the time that John wrote these letters. He's there. And it's not something in the future. It's not a singularity. He's talking about, again, and let me reiterate, he's talking about the Gnostics of his time. Those people that did not believe that Jesus came in the flesh, that he came in the Spirit only. And they rejected much of his teaching, as we've already looked at. Here in 1 John chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. Look at verse 3. It notes, of which you have heard that it is coming, talking about the Antichrist, and now it is already in the world. And folks, there are antichrists all over the place. Those who do not teach God's truth. That is just a reality. In 2 John, again, we go back to there. In 2 John, many deceivers have gone out into the world. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. So he's talking about the same group of individuals in both places here in verse 7. Again, he just brings this to light, that the spirit of the Antichrist is producing many Antichrists in his own day. But yet, there are those who try to manipulate even the original text, as we noted a moment ago, to teach something that is not found within the context of John's writings. And that is the singularity of the Antichrist. Simply stated, those who deny Christ had come in the flesh, chapter 2, verse 22, are the Antichrist. They were once Christians. They took Christianity and they applied the Gnostic ideology to Christianity. And you even go back, and if you study Gnosticism, there was Gnostic ideology with the people in the law of Moses. They were some Gnostic thinking back in that time for the Jews. The pagan religions was full of Gnosticism. the ones that was there when John was writing this. And it's been noted that at the time that John was bringing this to light, that a lot of the people that were being converted to Christ, coming into the church, being added by God, they were coming out of these pagan religions, and that's where the big influence of Gnosticism affected the church at the time period. And it's no different in reality today. So this is kind of what folks think about this idea. We've seen what John has written, and they want to use that definite article that we talked about a moment ago to denote an individual Antichrist. They use that, but if you go back and you look at the originals, I looked at the Texas Receptus, I looked at Nestle's, and I looked at UBS. That's the three that I have handy at the house in my office. I looked at all three of those Greek texts, and it all brings to light what we talked about a moment ago. It's talking about the Antichrist, this group. The Antichrist, this group. And it is a plurality. Yet, some people will note that the Antichrist is the individual. John Chrysostom held that it was the resurrected Nero. Nero was a Caesar, and he was one that murdered a lot of Christians in the beginning. Some want to use the idea that the Antichrist is the priesthood in the Catholic Church. Guess who the Catholics thought the Antichrist was? The Protestants. And it goes down through the ages, and every bad guy that comes along is the Antichrist. Any world leader that is evil is the Antichrist. Well, in a reality, they do, many of them, stand against Christ, but most of them were never Christians. I think that's an important thing. The Antichrist rose up from within the church. Now, I would concur that we have many Antichrists that has risen up in the church over my lifetime and teach things incorrectly, as we have noted. There are many, or they also note there were many Antichrists, and now in the world lead others to conclude Antichrist is an attitude reflected in both individuals and systems. In other words, the Antichrist is just an attitude that people have. Well, in a way it is. But in another way, as John brings it to light here, like into 2 John 7 through 9, these deceivers are going too far. They're adding to, taking away from God's truth. And you could go back and read from the first century till today. Individuals who say, oh, this is the Antichrist, and that's the Antichrist, and that's the Antichrist, or it's a system. Well, noting the system being the popes, that's being the system, and Catholicism. But John's talking about those that are inside the church that have turned their backs on Christ. Not only with the belief that Jesus did not come in the flesh, but that he did not do what, or they believe that he did not come in the flesh, and they do not go and follow Christ. They add to and take away, and of course they put in this this Gnostic ideologies that we talked about. Again, I encourage you, go back and look at our study on 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, and we expand on this because there's a whole lot more. Now, if the Lord wills, we'll talk about the man of sin or the man of lawlessness next time. And that'll probably be in December, first part of December. Will be the next Wednesday night that we talk about this. But there's a whole lot that we need to talk about when it talks about the man of sin or the man of lawlessness. And a lot of people want to promote the idea that the man of sin and the Antichrist are the same. Two different entities, two different things being talked about. So that'll give you a little thought to do some study on that topic as we move into some thinking about the man of sin or the man of lawlessness. So we'll begin there after the first of the month and continue in our study.